Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to the Practical Church Podcast. For those of you that are subscribed regular listeners, you'll know that it's been a little while since the last episode. So I want to real quickly, before we get into today's episode, which is about 7 ways to increase giving at your church, give you an update about what's going on and how we're going to continue in the future. You know, after about 5.5 years of doing the Practical Church Podcast, which I kind of stopped doing in January, February. I just kind of got tired of it. Did it for a long time, you know, doing the uploading, website stuff. And I enjoyed this part, content, connecting with you guys, answering questions. But all the backend stuff, don't really enjoy it. Also, after doing it 5.5 years and having to pay to upload the software, the services, it was fun, but it became a lot. And so I was kind of like, I think I'm gonna take a break. A couple of weeks ago, I got connected with Mission Support, which I'll talk about them in a second. And they're like, hey, we noticed, you know, this isn't really happening anymore. What if we came alongside and partnered with you, helped run the show so that you can focus on the content? We'll upload everything, do all the editing, help you with the Facebook group, the YouTube channel, all that stuff. But let's bring it back. We'll partner together and you can focus on the thing that you enjoy. And so, happy to say Practical Church is back because I get to focus on the content, and Mission Support, and you can learn more about them at missionsupport.com, is going to handle all of the back-end stuff to make this possible. So going forward, here's what the Practical Church podcast episode community is going to look like. The episodes, podcasts are the exact same as they were before. It's just going to be every other week instead of every week. And in the off weeks, or the weeks that there is not a podcast episode, we're going to be sending out a Practical Church newsletter. So every Wednesday, you're either going to be getting a new podcast episode or the Practical Church newsletter, which is really practical, different content than what you're going to see or listen to on the podcast. So if you're not subscribed to the Practical Church newsletter, you can go to missionsupport.com/practical, really missionsupport.com/practical for all of the Practical Church stuff, resources, how to connect, how to learn more, how to ask questions for future episodes. It's all going to be there. So that being said, let me dive into today's episode. Again, this is going to be brought to you in partnership with Mission Support. Mission Support knows you want to be effective in ministry, but if you're like most pastors, you probably feel like you never have enough time, energy, or expertise to get everything done. And so Mission Support comes alongside pastors like you as a guide to provide the expertise to do the things you don't know how to do and to give you back the time you desperately need. So whether it's things like bookkeeping, payroll, SEO, websites, or any other services, you can talk to a guide today at missionsupport.com and go from feeling scattered to focus on your mission. It's possible to love being a pastor again. So check out them for more information. And now let's get into today's episode, 7 ways to increase giving at your church. All right, here we go. Here is the first way you can increase giving by your church. Now, I want to say, maybe just the general principle before I get into it. You want to talk about it. So you got to talk about it a lot. That's how you increase generosity. I think it's interesting. Money, generosity, finances makes its way into a lot of sermons at New City Church. And so this is not point one. This is the general principle, and then you're going to kind of see how we can do this. So you want to talk about money a lot. I'm going to basically tell you 7 ways to do that. We talk about money a lot. It comes a lot. I think if you ask the average person at New City, hey, does New City talk about money a lot? They'd be like, they'll look at you like, I don't know. On the flip side, what I see a lot of is, you know, sometimes maybe you have the one time you have a sermon on generosity a year or whatever, and when you talk about it, you make a big deal, you kind of apologize for it, you give all these qualifiers like, well, we're not just here about your money, blah, blah, blah. And so when you do that, if you don't talk about money very often, and then you apologize a lot when you talk about money, well, then it trains your people to think, oh, this is a big deal. Oh, we should feel weird about this. So I just want to say, if you talk about money in a non-weird way, that's just a thing that you do, your people will be used to it and it won't be weird. So you want to talk about it, generosity a lot. Again, in New City, a lot of times it comes into the sermons. I mean, even this past Sunday, talking about different, ways to know we're in the book of James as I'm recording this. And one of the ways that we're faithful in following Jesus is with our generosity. And it doesn't have to be at New City Church where I lead, but like, how is your generosity? Like I said, the average, American these days gives about 2 to 3% of their income away. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, man, are you any different? Is your generosity any different? And so it doesn't always have to be a big thing, but you want to talk about it a lot. So I just want to say that. And now let's get into the 7 things. Here's number 1, is that you want to mention giving every single week. You want to mention giving every single week. I think this is increasingly important as fewer and fewer churches actually pass an offering plate during their Sunday services. We don't pass an offering plate at our Sunday services. Not against it. It's not even like a philosophical reason why we don't. It's just because from the very beginning, I don't know, 90% of our giving comes online. And so when we were a small church plant, the very first year, it would have been kind of awkward to pass a plate because hardly anyone would even actually use it. And so we don't pass a plate, not philosophically, it's just because that's not where much of our giving comes from. So if you don't pass a plate, well, then it's easy not to talk about it. So what we do at New City Church, you don't have to do it this way, but we always mention giving at the end of service. At the end of our service, we have the person who does our announcements. We call it Next Steps. They come up, they mention our Connect card again. If you're new, what we want you to do, we mention giving. If you'd like to give to the mission of New City, you can give one of two ways: online at newcityrdu.com, or the giving boxes in the back of the auditorium or in the lobby, and they say a few more things, and then we end the service. But we always say it. So it's not always like a preaching point necessarily, although I'm happy to kind of throw it in there quite frequently. But we always mention specifically how to give. Now, I want to maybe give you a little pro tip here. I do recommend probably somewhere in your announcements or next step time, you probably should throw giving in it. Again, we throw giving at the end of the service. I would train your people, like give them a script. When you mention giving, say it this way. So if it's not you, I know some churches maybe do it like right after the sermon. They respond in worship and in giving, and so like the pastor is the one that mentions it, so it's fine. But if it's not you, if you have someone else or maybe different people mentioning giving every week, what you want to do is you want to give them a script on how to talk about giving. Because I found some people talked about it like, hey, please give your money, like we really need it, or it kind of felt like guilt driven. Not that the announcement person meant to come across as guilt driven, but it felt like that. And so all we simply say is this: if you'd like to give to the mission of New City, here's how you can do so. It was short, it was sweet, it was to the point, but that's exactly what every week, whoever's on Next Steps, that's exactly what they say. If you'd like to give to the mission of New City Church, here's how you do so. So my pro tip on this is like, tell them exactly what to say so that they're not fumbling around either. But the first point is you want to mention it every single week. People won't give if they don't know how to, or maybe I think a lot of people do want to give, but they just kind of forget. So mention it, doesn't have to be a big thing, could be super quick, but you want to mention giving every Sunday. Now here's number 2. You should send out what we do at New City, what I recommend, quarterly giving statements. Sending out quarterly giving statements. So we all know the end of the year, here's your giving statement, end of December, or sorry, maybe early January, which you give for last year, which is great. We also, you might have experienced, sometimes when you send giving statements, there's like, hey, I'm missing this, or what's going on here? And so we found 2 things. One, it helps us like clear up any issues like throughout the year as opposed to waiting to the end of the year. The big thing though is when we send our giving statements, it shows people, here's how much you've actually given. And I think many times people might assume or might have thought they have given more than they actually did. And so we just like the end of the year, so the first quarter, you get your first 3 months of giving statements, or you're giving for the first 3 months. Halfway through the year, you get your first 6 months. We do the whole half a year. After 9 months, you get the whole 9 months. Now, again, they're not doing anything with that document necessarily for their taxes because they're going to get an end of the year giving statement as well. But it allows us to thank people for their generosity. We send out an email. We thank them for generosity. We share a couple of things that we're celebrating from this past quarter. We give them a financial update. So like, here's our year-to-date projected budget. Here's how much we projected to spend, how much we've actually spent so far this year. Here's how much we projected to take in. Here's how much we've actually taken in so far this year. Here's how much we've given to church plants. And, just like 6 or 7, here's our financials for the year. And again, we thank them for the generosity. So it's just an easy way to remind people, hey, here's how much you've given, because we found sometimes people might have assumed they had given more than they had. And it's like, oh, this stuff is important. So I would recommend, it doesn't have to take a long time, man, quarterly giving statements. It's an easy way. It doesn't feel weird. In fact, I think it feels helpful because it shows, hey, we're trying to be, we got nothing to hide financially. And we want to tell people, here's where your money is, here's where we're at as a church. And so doing it quarterly makes it an easy way to do that. I'd recommend sending out quarterly giving statements and not just wait till the end of the year. Again, it's another way to get your finances in front of your people. Number 3, I might recommend making it a value at our church. Now, all churches have strengths and weaknesses. I'm not saying there's a lot of things that New City isn't great at. One of the things that I think I have found that we are pretty unique at, and I can say there's a lot of confidence. I know a lot of pastors, church planners, we're part of Acts 29, a church planning network, and I get to serve as one of the assessors. So I go to a couple of assessments a year for pastors and their wives. And so I see all these church planning values and prospectus and stuff all the time. Hardly anybody, this is the third point, makes financial giving a value at their church. So here's my third point. Maybe it should be a value, or make it a value at your church. If you're a new church planner, get started, maybe this should be explicitly a value. So we got 5 values at New City. One of them is that grateful people give, and it is explicitly about generosity. One of the things we said, Jesus talks about money more than he talks about heaven, more talks about a lot of things, because Matthew 6, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's not your heart, your treasure will follow your heart, but your heart follows your treasure. And it's one of the few things in this world that we can control. And so, I mean, it's a financial generosity. We say, hey, at New City Church, if you're a partner at New City Church, what we call members, you have to give. Now, we don't necessarily that way, but we say, hey, if you're in a part of New City, you should be able to you should be comfortable giving financially to this church. If not, you should go to a church that you're comfortable. Now, people can quibble about these things. We don't do 10%. We don't say you have to give 10%. I don't believe believers have to give 10%. I think you could be a faithful Christian and give 3%, and you could be unfaithful and give 10%, depending on background, how long you've been following Jesus, a whole sorts of things. So for us, it's not about a marker, but it is about, hey, we expect you to give financially. And of course, there are exceptions. If there's something going on, you lost a job, single parent, a health crisis, totally fine. But you should give if you call New City Church home. And if you're not comfortable giving here, you should join a church where you are. And so we check this, every year we renew our partnership stuff. We have different values and different expectations for our partners. And so if for those that have stopped giving or not giving, we'll say, hey, what's going on? How you doing? If there's anything we can help with. Again, if somebody stops giving as well, there's probably a sign that something's going on. Either they're really upset with something at the church, maybe they left your church, or there's been a life change. And so it's a way to know what's going on. I might recommend financial giving, have vision behind why it is what we do, what it is, why it's important for us. But financial generosity is actually a value of ours, because when I look at the scriptures, it's clearly a value to God. So for us, it's one of our values, maybe something to think through. Hey, one of our values, again, maybe this is another podcast, but when it comes to values, one of the things I encourage, if your church has values, which pretty much most churches do if you listen to this, is that you should attach behaviors to each of your church's values. Otherwise, it just is all talk and not actually doing it. So we've got 5 values at New City Church, and one of them is financial generosity. And so what is the behavior attached to that? Well, if you're a part of New City, you should be giving to your church so that we can advance the mission together. So perhaps financial generosity, however you want to phrase it, should be a value at your church. If it is, well, it'll be an easy way to talk about it. Number 4, you want to connect stories to generosity. Connect stories to generosity. So whenever you maybe have baptisms, or maybe you had like a youth camp, student camp, or something cool that's happening at your church, maybe you share a testimony video, you want to capitalize on making sure you communicate, hey, stuff like this only happens because of your generosity. If you're involved in church planning and maybe you're supporting a church planner and they come and preach or you share their story, then you should say this happens because of your generosity. So we're sure to do this. We had a baptism Sunday a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned it after baptism, and I had our person who was doing next steps that Sunday also mention it at the end of the service. Hey, if you'd like to give to the mission of New City Church, here's how. I just want to say, hey, your generosity is what makes days like today possible. People love stories of life change, and of course they should. And so you want to maybe talk about financially, hey, it is your generosity that makes this happen, because it is. Now, of course, it's more than that. It's their serving, it's their showing up, it's their loving, praying. All these things are possible. But if you don't have any money, the church is not going to exist. You got to pay rent, got to pay staff, got to pay for supplies, all sorts of things. You don't have to pay for this podcast though, so some things are free. But you got to pay for stuff, right? And so you connect stories of generosity. Again, if you've got a church planner, you have them preach, whatever, man, tell your church, here's how much we're giving, and it's because of your generosity. So we're involved with a lot of church plants, and we always want to highlight it that way. If you do baptisms, it's because of your generosity. If you have a really big Sunday, maybe Easter or Christmas, or maybe you did something special or extra, make sure you tell people it's because of your generosity. If you send like a weekly church newsletter, man, I would re-highlight, hey, like for example, when we did a baptisms, we had pictures in there, celebrated, and again, I said, this is possible because of your generosity. So just make sure anytime that anything cool happens, make sure you mention generosity in conjunction, because people want to give to that. That's what they want to give to. So highlight it and say it. Connect stories to generosity to encourage people to continue to give. Number 5 is you want to talk about giving with no qualifications. So I mentioned this in the beginning when I just said, hey, you need to talk about it more, and here are the various ways you can talk about it. No qualifications. So when you talk about finances, just talk about it. I don't think in our culture today, when we talk about a biblical sexual ethic, we don't qualify it of like, well, hey, guys, listen, I know this is like really countercultural, and I know it's hard for us to hear, and I know it's not popular. Now, I'm not saying when you talk about biblical sexual ethic, you can't like mention, hey, this is different, but like how you communicate it matters. Like you don't have a million qualifications. When you talk about, I don't know, repentance and following Jesus, you don't give a million qualifications. You just say, man, here's the reality. Here's what Jesus asked us to do, and here's why we should do it. And here's what we get. Here's the response when we repent. So with money, it's just a thing I see. It's like we apologize. Like if you're gonna talk about money, man, just talk about it. And don't make it weird. Don't make it awkward, because when you make it weird or awkward, or when you apologize, again, people begin to think, man, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this. Or yeah, it is kind of like it is kind of like heavy or weird to talk about this. Or like, yeah, church and money is kind of like an awkward combination. So, but if you just say, hey, here's the deal. Here's what it looks like to be faithful. Or if you're preaching a text or preaching a sermon series and it's in the scripture that you're reading, like just talk about it and don't qualify it and talk about how it is a big deal. So again, I mentioned at the beginning, so this one's quick here, but just talk about it and don't apologize. Don't make it a big deal. Don't say, hey, we don't normally talk about finances. Like maybe you don't typically do like a whole sermon on finance, on generosity, which is, we don't typically do a whole sermon on generosity. We typically preach through books of the Bible, so if it's there, we'll do it, but like, it's not typically just a whole sermon. But if we were, then we just do it. Like, don't apologize for it. Otherwise, people begin to think, oh, that is kind of weird. So talk about giving with no qualifications. Number 6, first-time giving, or follow up people's first-time giving with an email. So what I do, actually have it on my to-do list, which is my task manager. Every single Tuesday, I go and look at our giving, which this is not on here, but I would say, hey, if you're a pastor, I would encourage you to look at giving. You know what's going on in your people's lives, a lot of other areas, sex, job, relationships, porn, addictions, like some pretty intimate stuff. And I know that maybe the thing is, well, if I see their giving, I'm going to treat them differently. Well, like you see their sin and their issues and their weaknesses, and you probably don't. Some people serve way more at your church than others, and I bet you still like care for everyone the same. Generosity is, look at people's giving is helpful because you can first of all, you can say thank you to those who are giving, those who are giving a lot. I know sometimes, like last year in the Practical Church Facebook group, I kind of said like, here's my I mentioned how I write letters to our top 10 givers every year. Some people were like, well, that's favoritism, whatever. Okay. What do you do with the people who serve a lot or with your leaders who volunteer at your church? Do you ever recognize them and thank them maybe more than the person who serves once a month? You probably do. And so you should cultivate that and thank that. And so this is a whole different thing. I recommend looking at giving because it shows you where things are. That being said, first up, giving follow-up email. So I'm the one that sends it out. I have this this little script that I just copy and paste. Basically, I don't remember off the top of my head. Something to the effect of, hey, thanks so much for your generosity. We blah, blah, blah. We send out quarterly giving statements to the email associated to your giving account. If you ever have any questions, please let us know. What's funny is like, no one ever responds to that email, but I know it's appreciative. Like I know when you give somewhere for the first time, it's like, did anybody ever even see this? And so whether it's $5 or $1,000 or whatever, everyone gets the same exact email saying thank you and letting them know that we saw it and we're grateful and we're totally open and transparent with our generosity and saying thanks for joining our church and our mission. Now, that being said, send that every week. And so it's helpful. I also like maybe a pro tip to this too. Every time that we, because I check if we had any new givers the past week, every Tuesday morning, I also then take their email and then I put it in our weekly church newsletter because, most people don't. We send out a weekly, church update newsletter like probably many of you do. And the only way we get people's emails is if they give us a Connect card. And, not everybody does that when they're new. And so if they're giving, it's one of the ways to, hey, remind them of what things are going on. So I always like double check, hey, is this email in our email database? If not, I throw it in there as well. But send a first-time giving email, no matter how much they give, because it shows, hey, we saw this and we're grateful, and we're as transparent, as honest as you want us to be, and thanks. So first-time giving email, write a simple script that you can copy and paste. Mine's like 5 sentences. It's super short, but it shows that we got their gift and we're grateful for it. So send a first-time giving email. The number 7, last but not least, be honest when you have needs. Be honest. Be honest if things are tight. Not in a guilt way or shameful way, but your people want to know, man. Like your people love your church. Your leaders want to see things go well. And there's been times, like I'll give you 2 examples for us. One was when we raised money to move into the building that we're currently in now. We moved at the fall. Well, we moved in 2020. So we moved into our current building the week before COVID hit. Great timing. It was awful. But we were at a really small little retail shop location, or an office park, tiny, out of space, looking for a while. Found the space, came available, basically said, hey, we need to we need to raise money. For us, it was $75,000 over 2 weeks. And I was basically like, the money has to come in over the next 6 months and it has to be above your normal giving. And so that's what we said. If we can get $75,000 in commitments over the next 2 weeks, then we'll move. If not, we're here. And it wasn't a shameful thing. It was like, we got to afford it. And so we do it. 2 weeks later, we get the commitments. It was $118,000. Totally cool. It was awesome. It was amazing. But it wasn't guilt. It was just like, here's where we are. We moved in this building, they said the week before COVID. And so part of that money that we were raising was supposed to cover our rent difference for the rest of 2020 to allow us to grow into the space. Well, as you know, the growing didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. We had to close down and all these sort of things. So the end of 2020, in December, we told our church again and say, hey, things are really tight. We've cut everything we can. Before we make some like drastic decisions, I just want to say, hey, over the next couple of months, if we didn't have a money figure or whatever, if there's anything above and beyond you'd like to do over the next couple of months that would really help us, as we go into next year and before we have to make some drastic cuts and all that sort of thing. I didn't give any financial thing. It was just on one Sunday at the end of the service, just letting people know, hey, here's where we are. We're doing everything we can. If there's anything else you'd like to do. Well, what was amazing is people didn't just like give more over the next couple of months. It was literally that month. We actually ended December, I can't remember the exact number, but it was like a little less than $1,000 in the black. So we were like negative big time. Moving away a building that was more than double our rent. We, instead of grown, we went the other way and we decreased and all those sort of things. And just by saying, hey, we need help, like we were like, fine. It was wild. It was absolutely wild. So again, and maybe those are kind of maybe bigger things, moving buildings. People really get excited about that. I get it. All I have to say, hey, man, be honest. If there is a need, tell people. People don't know how to give or what to give to if they don't know. I have found that if you're just honest about where your church is, people will respond to that. Now, of course, if it's every single week, we don't have enough money, we can't do anything, or if it's guilt-driven, like, don't you want to see your friends know Jesus? Or don't you know that, rent costs a lot of money? Like, no one's going to give you that. But if it's just an honest, like, hey, here's where we are, here's where things are going, we could really use the support, some help. If you have any questions, please let me know. That can go a long way. So those are 7 ways to increase generosity at your church. Mention it every week. Number 1. Number 2, quarterly giving statements. 3, make it a value at your church. 4, connect stories to generosity. 5, talk about it with no qualifications. Number 6, first time giving follow-up emails. Those are helpful. And number 7, be honest when you have needs and if things are tight. Here's my observation for this episode. I would encourage you not to feel bad suggesting that people, when you meet with people, that they meet closer to you. I've observed, and I've observed this a lot in myself as well, that, when you got people in your church, you got needs, they want to meet, they want to come, they want to, get together. And part of this probably depends on where you live and what the kind of expectations of your kind of city, community are. But it's like, I felt for a long time that I need to meet someone halfway, wherever they live. In Raleigh, we are a city, and so some people will drive a little bit further. Maybe if you're a small town, people might not drive very far. Or if you're in a rural community, people might be used to driving, quite far. And so anytime someone wanted to meet, or whether they reached out to me or if I reached out to them, I was like, hey, where are you coming from? I'll be coming from typically the church or somewhere close to that. And I'll pick a spot. So I use Calendly, which I highly recommend, so I don't have to go back and forth on the time. They pick a time, then I pick another spot. The problem is when you have multiple meetings a week, sometimes 2 or 3 meetings a day, all that driving adds up. And so a couple months ago with my Calendly, you can do this. I think this is a paid version. So you have to have the paid version of Calendly, which is like $10 a month. So it's totally worth it anyway. You can actually put meeting locations. So I put a list of like 4 coffee shops and 2 restaurants, like where I meet people for lunch, that are all within 10 minutes of New City Church. And so when I send a calendar invite to meet, whether somebody asks me to meet, which happens, or if I reach out and say, hey, I'd love to meet about X or whatever, I'll send my invite. I say, pick a time. And then it has a list of things. New City Church is one of them. And then there's also an option to say to be determined, which will follow up after you pick a meeting. I mean, pretty much everybody that if they go to New City, now if they're outside of New City, it's not like this, but pretty much everyone at our church picks one of those spots. And it makes me, I don't know why I felt bad. It's kind of made me think of it this way. Like when you go to the doctor or the dentist, like you have to make an appointment and drive, like they don't meet you halfway. And so I just found it was really helpful in a way that it didn't make me feel like, now how can I get you closer, if I'm driving this far and you're driving this far. All I have to say, don't feel bad suggesting it for meeting spots that are closer to where you are, because this is your job and you probably meet with a handful of people every single week, or at least with some consistency, and those times add up. Especially if somebody reaches out to meet with you, well, clearly they'd like to talk and they've got some needs. And so this isn't like your time is more valuable or you're better than them, but it does add up if you do this quite a lot, if you're driving around. So my suggestion here, observation, hey, don't feel bad suggesting meeting spots closer to you. And if you want to make it even easier, use Calendly Calendly, you can pre-select like certain spots. And so when they pick a time in your calendar, it makes them pick a spot as well. And that can really, kind of take okay, now that you've picked a spot, will you come all the way over here? So don't feel bad. People have to drive for the doctor, the dentist, other appointments they make. It's okay if they have to drive to you. To make it even easier, you can put it on Calendly, put your specific location, and then it's all done right at once. Here is the personal growth tip for this episode. Let me talk to you about how to turn frustration into hope. Here is how you can turn frustration into hope. Frustration often arises and lingers not necessarily from hard situations, but from hard or discouraging situations with no plan or attack. So it's not just that you're frustrated. Typically, in my experience, is because you're frustrated and you don't know what to do about it. So for example, if something isn't working at your job, but you don't know what is causing the issue, you'll be frustrated. If your marriage is in a hard spot, but you don't know how to fix the problem, like you don't know what to do, well, then you'll be frustrated. If your kid is struggling in school, but you don't know what in particular to do about it, you'll be frustrated. If you have a physical lingering ailment in your body and you don't know what type of rehab to do that will bring healing, you'll be frustrated. It's not just that you have the issue, it's that you don't know how to fix it or address it. Even if the problem isn't improving right away, having a plan of action often or always typically removes the frustration. You may still wish the problem was resolved, but at least you're doing something about it that may lead to a result you desire, that is, something is actually being done. Many times, it's not actually the problem that's the problem, it's the lack of direction on what to do about it. So let me give you a personal example. There was a time when I was frustrated with my preaching skills. Now, probably always, all of us have this like low level frustration wanting to get better, right? But there was I just know I can be better, but I wasn't sure what to do until I got a preaching coach who helped me work on areas to improve. Now, I didn't improve right away. And of course, even today, still working on it, but I had a course of action. Like I had some do this, think about this. Here are some practical things to work towards as opposed to, well, I just don't know how to improve, but I know I need to improve. I've been writing the Best Minute newsletter, which is where I get a lot of these personal growth tips from. My Best Minute newsletter, I send it out every Tuesday morning. DylanDotson.com/best is where you can get that. I've been writing that newsletter for about 3 years now. And there was a time when I became frustrated with the lack of growth that the newsletter was experiencing. But then I spent some time last year watching content on how to improve a newsletter. So how to have a better design, how to improve your writing, how to grow an audience. And then I started following successful newsletters on Twitter, or X as it's called now. And so once I developed a course of action on how to improve, my frustration diminished because I actually knew what to do. So it's okay to be stuck, and it's great to want to fix a problem, but the goal is to find a pathway forward. The goal is to find something to do. Even if it still takes time to get the result that you want, you'll no longer be living in frustration. The best remedy for frustration is a plan. Find a plan, get some help, develop a strategy, and that is what will turn your frustration into excitement. And for the last section of the episode today, I always like to end with a question from one of you. Now, you can submit questions at missionsupport.com/practical, and I can answer your ministry question at a future episode, or sometimes I grab the questions from our Practical Church Facebook group. This one comes from Steve in our Practical Church Facebook group. He wrote this: does your church use a particular app to help team leads and team members communicate? If so, what works best? Our church currently uses Planning Center. Thanks. The challenge with this is, I think a lot of this depends on the size of your church. So the bigger you are, the more need for maybe automated, software. The smaller you are, the easier it is to do things like Google Docs and that sort of thing. And I do know it's helpful to prepare for the future, but depending on the size of your church, the hard thing about church management software is that nobody wants to use them. Nobody wants to use it at your church. Now, we use Planning Center for our serve team requests. And the reason we use Planning Center is because it's the most user-friendly and it's the easiest to use. But nobody actually wants to use that stuff. So at New City, we have Planning Center. We also have Google Sheets for all of our various serving positions and what that looks like. For us, because it's not super complex for us right now, a lot of our serve team emails are sent from the person, our kids director will send it from her email address, not through Planning Center, but just herself. Our hospitality person will do it that way. Our worship person will do that. Now we have the database of all the stuff, but it's simply sent through our emails. And so I found for us, depending on the size of your church, if you're probably less than 200, unless you've got someone who loves this stuff, Google Sheets are actually pretty helpful in terms of communicating. Most people, if you say, hey, I want you to communicate through Planning Center, they're just not going to do it because it's another step and it's another login. And so for us, like our serve team members, it's just through like emails is the primary way we do it. We don't communicate through a church management software because we're not at the point where we need to do that. And it's just a friction point to make people not communicate. So maybe you could figure it out and that would be great. And maybe some of you probably listen to this, like have a suggestion of how to do it. So if so, go to the Practical Church Facebook group and let us know. But we don't use a particular app. We've got everything stored in Planning Center, but we just use personal emails right now just because we found that most people, there's just a friction point to have log in and do all that sort of stuff. So if you find a way to make it easier, that'd be great. But I want to address this question just to say, it's a problem that we all face because it's a friction point. I have to have another thing to log into, and most people aren't going to want to do that. They prefer just their email and just their text. And so that's what we primarily do at New City Church. As you grow and develop, that might change. But just know if you are wanting people to say, hey, only communicate through this medium, and it's another thing they have to log in and do that they don't use for anything else. So like, your church management software, your people that don't use that for anything else except for that, it can be difficult. So just want to keep that in mind. You got to find what works best. My biggest recommendation is find something that has the least amount of friction. Even if it takes a little bit more work on your end, it'll actually make it so that people that communicate. If the friction is high, people won't use it. Well, thanks again for checking out the Practical Church podcast today. As always, we're also on YouTube now, thanks to Mission Support, so you can search out Practical Church on YouTube as well if you want to watch the YouTube version. Thanks again to our partners, the Mission Support. Again, whether it's bookkeeping, SEO, websites, all of these like background services that you didn't go to seminary for that are stressing you out, you go to missionsupport.com to find out their services, learn more for them. And again, if you want to connect with me, if you want to sign up for the Practical Church newsletter, ask a question for a future episode, really all this stuff for Practical Church, missionsupport.com/practical. That's where you can get all the information. And I'll be back with you in 2 weeks on the Practical Church podcast.